Alright, hey YouTube, Don here again. We're at SMR. I want to go over some of the basics today on copper with you. Three main categories and some of the tools you'll need to identify. The two main things you're going to need with this to help identify your copper is you're going to need a magnet. Any kind of magnet's going to work. A refrigerator magnet, a magnet off the back of the speaker. Pretty much anything you can come across. And then the other thing is a 4-inch angle grinder works the best. If you don't have one of those, a small file is going to help you pretty good. Alright, before we go over the basic categories, I want to start with a couple things that a lot of people throw in here with their copper, and it's just a real common mistake, and I just want to show you guys a few things real fast. Like I said before with the magnet, the first thing you want to do is check all your copper with a magnet. Obviously, it's steel wool, it's got a copper tint to it. I see this kind of stuff all the time. Just mix it in with your shred, it's not really worth anything. The next biggest one, jumper cable ends. They have a plating on there. It kind of looks copper. It's still rusted. I left it outside to show you guys that they do rust, and it's just steel, same thing. You're gonna want to put that in with your scrap. Another big one, and a lot of people get hurt feelings over this one, are ground rods. It's got a copper jacket. You can grind it. It's gonna look like copper, and it's got a solid steel core on them. They're just scrap metal. A lot of people want to know why there's not a different price on them, because percentage wise, I mean, there's really no copper on this thing. If you want to waste your time and try to cut this jacket off and peel it off, you can get number 2 price out of it, probably without corroded. It's going to be after being in the ground, so keep that in mind. It's just going to go with your scrap. And then the next thing are plumbing fixtures, air conditioner fixtures. You're going to want to check this stuff with your file and your magnet. You're going to have copper. Your best way to tell, hit it with your file. Your copper is going to have a nice shiny yellow tint to it, and your copper is going to be more red and orange colored. So you want to trim these ends off. You can use a hammer on the edge of your table, smack them, bend it apart. Angle grinder works the best. You can always do that. And then the next thing on your copper is leaving your brass fittings on your copper. Always trim your brass off. If you put this on the scale with your copper, they're going to buy everything you have at a brass price. You definitely don't want to do that. Best way to do it, scratch it with a grinder or the file. Like I said, you're going to get the yellow and the copper color in with it, and you're going to know what's what. So make sure you separate your brass from your copper. It's going to downgrade you. A lot of states it's illegal to scrap burnt wire. If it is legal in your state, they're not going to buy it with plastic melted to the bottom of the pile, or however you want to call it. The best thing you could do with a piece like this, cut it here and put this in with your insulated wire. We'll talk about that in a later video. But any burnt wire is automatic going to be number 2. It's not going to go into the number 1 category, no matter if it meets the qualifications that we're going to talk about here in a second. We're going to move on to the number 2 category, and we're going to start with wire. Any copper wire that's 16 gauge or larger in diameter is going to automatically be number 2. It's not big enough to go with your number 1. And like I said, any kind of burnt wire is automatic number 2. And you just want to watch out for that. Even if it's braided in separate strands like this, the individual strands on this wire are still smaller than 16 gauge, so that's going to put it with your number 2. Another thing with your number 2 wire is you want to look for any kind of lacquer coatings. Anything heavy lacquered like this, it's going to have a red tint to it. You want to check it, you want to scratch it with your file and make sure it's copper. A lot of times this ends up being aluminum. This one here happens to be copper, so you just want to keep an eye on it and make sure, because they will buy everything as aluminum price if you mix in aluminum wire with your copper. Next, we're going to move on to tubing. Anything that's pitted, it's been in the ground for a while, is going to go as your number 2. Anything with solder joints, anywhere there's solder, heavy corrosion, any kind of oil or dirt, any contaminants, it's gonna downgrade it to a number 2 category. So all your plumbing fixtures, anything like this right here. Your solid coppers have hardeners in them because they got threads and they're used for machine work, and it's got hardeners in it, so it's not going to go with your number 1. It's not going to follow the rule of 96% clean copper, which is the rule of thumb for number 2. So anything that's got threads or worked in a machine shop is going to go with your number 2 solids. Your radiator ends, we'll get into this more when we get into radiators, but if you cut them like these are cut here, they have a soldered lip on them. Those are your number 2. Here's another bolt. It's threaded, so it's going to have the same hardeners. It's going to go as number 2. And then any of your sheet copper like this is going to be number 2 automatic. But what I want to show you is this tin coating. You can have tin coating on your wire. It's still going to go as number 2 if it's got the tin coating. And something you want to look out for, any of your sheet copper with rolled edges is likely to have a steel ring in it to help it keep its shape. It's kind of flexible, so you want to hit it with your magnet and just make sure that steel's not in there. If it is, you can cut it, take a pair of pliers and pull that ring right out pretty easily most of the time. Alright, moving on to the number 1 category of copper. This is what everyone thinks they have, and they run into a lot of problems, and I just want to go over some of the basics and some of the stuff to look for. This tubing here, it's hollow. It's not a solid piece of tubing. You got a little bit of corrosion on the end, but if you run your finger across, it's not really pitted. It's smooth. The only spot that's pitted is this little spot, and the rule of thumb on this is 99% clean copper. So this is borderline, but they will accept it as number 1 at most yards. And another piece of tubing that's a really good example, it's a piece of tubing. You got this sticker right here. The sticker doesn't mean anything. That'll melt right off in the furnace. This is still number 1 with the sticker. You want to make sure you cut your brass ends off so it's just clean copper. And then also the same thing as number 2, make sure there's no oil or dirt in it. It's still going to go with your number 1 tubing. And then your radiator ends. I showed you previously on your radiator ends they had the solder joints. These were cut behind the joint, so this right here could actually go with your number 1. And then your solid copper wire. This piece right here, there's a little bit of tarnish on it, but it's a solid piece of wire, so that's easily 99% copper. And even though this is tarnished like it is, if you look, it's a solid diameter. You're going to get away with this in your number 1 at just about any yard you go to. The same thing with this burnt piece. It was a little burnt. There's no insulation whatsoever left, and it's still solid wire, so you're going to be safe putting that with your number. Alright, the final category is going to be Bare Bright wire. Some people call it Shiny Bright, Angel Bright. There's a lot of different names. It's the same stuff. A lot of places won't even put this on their price sheet. If you ask about it or you have enough of it, they're going to buy it at a higher price than what even number 1 is. Also, I want to add that it has to meet all the qualifications as your number 1. This is number 1 Bare Bright, is what I should have said. This is going to be any of your stripped wire, solid diameter, 16 gauge or smaller, and it's got to be clean. I mean, no tarnish, no anything. It's got to be really clean, but I mean, they pay a premium price for this stuff. And the only exception to that's going to be is if you find some wire that's a little bit lighter in color than the rest of it, they'll still let you get away with this. And what changes the color in this is it's not actually a lacquer coating. When the wire gets too much heat ran through it, it'll dull. So keep that in mind when you're separating out your scrap. And this is going to help you from other yards trying to downgrade your materials, especially in down markets. A trick that a lot of scrap yards are trying to pull right now is they'll advertise a premium price on this stuff, knowing that you're not going to bring it in separated right. And if they find any of the lower grades in with your better stuff, they're going to drop the price down to the lower grade, and that's the reason they have such higher prices. So you really want to pay attention to what you're doing when you're bringing your material in and making sure that you're getting the most for your material when you bring it.